The day started like any other for her. She woke up, scrolled through her phone for a bit, and chatted with her friends about meeting up later at the community center. It wasn't a special plan or anything. They just wanted to hang out, talk, and maybe explore the small event happening there. She didn't expect anything unusual to happen. She definitely didn't expect that her words would change someone's life, including her own. When she arrived at the community center, the place was alive with people coming and going. There were stalls selling small handmade things, a few kids running around, and some volunteers trying to organize a local charity drive. Her friends were already there, waving at her, holding paper cups of juice. She joined them, feeling the usual comfort of being around people she knew well. They walked around for a while, stopping here and there. One of her friends tried to win a small prize at a game stall and lost terribly, making everyone laugh. Another friend kept taking pictures of everything, even things that didn't need to be photographed, just for fun. The mood was light, and the group felt relaxed. As they made their way deeper inside the building, they noticed an old piano sitting in a corner near the entrance of a large hall. It looked like it had been there forever. Its wood slightly scratched, the keys a bit yellow, and the seat worn from years of use. Most people passed by without even glancing at it. But she noticed someone sitting on the bench. He wasn't playing. He wasn't even touching the keys. He just sat there quietly, looking down as if deep in thought. He looked a bit shy, or maybe just lost in his own world. His posture was calm, almost too calm for a place that was buzzing with noise. Her friends nudged each other. One whispered, "Do you think he can play?" Another said, "Maybe he's waiting for someone." Someone else joked, "Maybe he's just sitting there because he's tired." She watched him for a moment. There was something unusual about him, but she couldn't tell what it was. He didn't seem like he was purposely trying to look mysterious or cool. If anything, he looked like he wanted to disappear into the background. One of her friends, always the playful one, whispered loudly, "Go talk to him." She shook her head. But the friend insisted, "Come on, just say something funny." The group pushed her forward lightly, and she rolled her eyes but walked toward him anyway, thinking it would just be a harmless moment. When she reached the piano, she stood a little to the side, not wanting to startle him. "Hey!" she said with a friendly tone. He looked up slowly, almost surprised someone was talking to him. She smiled, but it was a teasing smile, not a serious one. "If you play something beautiful," she joked, "I'll marry you." Her friends burst into quiet laughter behind her. She didn't mean anything by the words. It was just a playful line, the kind of thing people say when they're trying to lighten the mood. She expected him to laugh too, or at least smile awkwardly and shake his head. Instead, he just sat there, staring at the keys for a second. He gave a small, polite smile, but it wasn't the kind of smile someone gives when they think something is funny. It was gentle, almost thoughtful, as if he was deciding whether or not to respond. The silence stretched for a moment. She felt a little embarrassed. Had she made him uncomfortable? She didn't want that. She was about to apologize, but he shook his head slowly, like he wanted her to know she hadn't upset him. Her friends whispered behind her, "Maybe he doesn't know how to play," and another added, "Maybe he's too shy." She felt the words floating around in the air, mixing with the casual noise of the event. She didn't want to pressure him, so she shrugged a little and said, "It's just a joke. Don't worry." She smiled again and started stepping back, thinking the moment was over. But before she could move away completely, he looked up at her with a quiet confidence she hadn't noticed before. It wasn't loud or showy. It wasn't even obvious. But it was there. Something steady in his eyes that hadn't been there a moment ago. He gently placed his hands on the piano keys. Her friends fell silent. She froze in place, unsure of what was happening. A small group of people walking nearby slowed down, sensing something was about to happen. But then he lifted his hands without playing and let them rest on his lap again. He looked conflicted, as though something inside him was telling him to play, while another part of him was holding him back. She didn't understand it, but she could feel the hesitation in him. It wasn't the hesitation of someone who didn't know how to play. It felt deeper than that. She wanted to give him space, so she said lightly, "It's okay. Really?" You don't have to. He nodded slowly, almost gratefully. But there was still that look on his face. Something complicated, something hidden. Her friends started whispering again, and someone joked, "See? He got scared." Another said, "Maybe he's pretending so he doesn't have to play." But she didn't laugh. There was something about him that made her think the situation wasn't as simple as it looked. He stood up from the bench suddenly, like he was about to leave. But then he paused. He looked back at the piano, then at her, then at the ground. His hands trembled slightly, and he clasped them together as if trying to steady himself. She didn't want him to feel bad, so she stepped forward a little and said in a softer tone, "I didn't mean to make things weird. It was just a joke between friends." He nodded again. His voice was quiet when he finally spoke. "I know." Just 2 words, but his tone felt heavy, like he was carrying something on his shoulders that no one else could see. She didn't push him. She didn't ask anything else. She simply nodded back. He sat down again, slowly, as if unsure of whether he should stay or go. She knew he wasn't sitting down because of her challenge. It wasn't that simple. There was something inside him struggling, something connected to that piano. The event around them continued with its usual noise, but the small corner where the piano sat felt strangely quiet, as if it was separated from everything else. Her friends eventually grew bored and wandered off to look at something else, but she stayed nearby. Not too close, just enough to make sure he didn't feel pressured. She watched him from a comfortable distance, curious but respectful. He kept glancing at the piano, then at his hands, then at the floor. He seemed to be fighting a silent battle with himself. She wondered if he once played and stopped for some reason. Maybe something had happened. Maybe he wasn't ready. She didn't know. All she knew was that the joke she had thrown so casually had touched something deeper in him. She didn't regret talking to him. She just wished she had understood earlier that he wasn't just a quiet guy sitting at a piano. There was more, so much more, that she couldn't see yet. He finally stood up again, but this time with more certainty. Without looking at her or anyone else, he walked away from the piano slowly. She watched him leave, not knowing that this wasn't the end of their story, not even close. She thought it was just a moment that would fade away by the time she reached home. A small memory, a funny little story to tell her friends later. But she didn't know who he really was. The day started like any other for her. She woke up, scrolled through her phone for a bit, and chatted with her friends about meeting up later at the community center. It wasn't a special plan or anything. They just wanted to hang out, talk, and maybe explore the small event happening there. She didn't expect anything unusual to happen. She definitely didn't expect that her words would change someone's life, including her own. When she arrived at the community center, the place was alive with people coming and going. There were stalls selling small handmade things, a few kids running around, and some volunteers trying to organize a local charity drive. Her friends were already there, waving at her, holding paper cups of juice. She joined them, feeling the usual comfort of being around people she knew well. They walked around for a while, stopping here and there. One of her friends tried to win a small prize at a game stall and lost terribly, making everyone laugh. Another friend kept taking pictures of everything, even things that didn't need to be photographed, just for fun. The mood was light, and the group felt relaxed. As they made their way deeper inside the building, they noticed an old piano sitting in a corner near the entrance of a large hall. It looked like it had been there forever. Its wood slightly scratched, the keys a bit yellow, and the seat worn from years of use. Most people passed by without even glancing at it. But she noticed someone sitting on the bench. He wasn't playing. He wasn't even touching the keys. He just sat there quietly, looking down as if deep in thought. He looked a bit shy, or maybe just lost in his own world. His posture was calm, almost too calm for a place that was buzzing with noise. Her friends nudged each other. One whispered, "Do you think he can play?" Another said, "Maybe he's waiting for someone." Someone else joked, "Maybe he's just sitting there because he's tired." She watched him for a moment. There was something unusual about him, but she couldn't tell what it was. He didn't seem like he was purposely trying to look mysterious or cool. If anything, he looked like he wanted to disappear into the background. One of her friends, always the playful one, whispered loudly, "Go talk to him." She shook her head. But the friend insisted, "Come on, just say something funny." The group pushed her forward lightly, and she rolled her eyes but walked toward him anyway, thinking it would just be a harmless moment. When she reached the piano, she stood a little to the side, not wanting to startle him. "Hey," she said with a friendly tone. He looked up slowly, almost surprised someone was talking to him. She smiled, but it was a teasing smile, not a serious one. "If you play something beautiful," she joked, "I'll marry you." Her friends burst into quiet laughter behind her. She didn't mean anything by the words. It was just a playful line, the kind of thing people say when they're trying to lighten the mood. She expected him to laugh too, or at least smile awkwardly and shake his head. Instead, he just sat there, staring at the keys for a second. He gave a small, polite smile, but it wasn't the kind of smile someone gives when they think something is funny. It was gentle, almost thoughtful, as if he was deciding whether or not to respond. The silence stretched for a moment. She felt a little embarrassed. Had she made him uncomfortable? She didn't want that. She was about to apologize, but he shook his head slowly, like he wanted her to know she hadn't upset him. Her friends whispered behind her, "Maybe he doesn't know how to play," and another added, "Maybe he's too shy." She felt the words floating around in the air, mixing with the casual noise of the event. She didn't want to pressure him, so she shrugged a little and said, "It's just a joke. Don't worry." She smiled again and started stepping back, thinking the moment was over. But before she could move away completely, he looked up at her with a quiet confidence she hadn't noticed before. It wasn't loud or showy. It wasn't even obvious. But it was there. Something steady in his eyes that hadn't been there a moment ago. He gently placed his hands on the piano keys. Her friends fell silent. She froze in place, unsure of what was happening. A small group of people walking nearby slowed down, sensing something was about to happen. But then he lifted his hands without playing and let them rest on his lap again. He looked conflicted, as though something inside him was telling him to play, while another part of him was holding him back. She didn't understand it, but she could feel the hesitation in him. It wasn't the hesitation of someone who didn't know how to play. It felt deeper than that. She wanted to give him space, so she said lightly, "It's okay. Really? You don't have to." He nodded slowly, almost gratefully, but there was still that look on his face. Something complicated, something hidden. Her friends started whispering again, and someone joked, "See? He got scared." Another said, "Maybe he's pretending so he doesn't have to play." But she didn't laugh. There was something about him that made her think the situation wasn't as simple as it looked. He stood up from the bench suddenly, like he was about to leave. But then he paused. He looked back at the piano, then at her, then at the ground. His hands trembled slightly, and he clasped them together as if trying to steady himself. She didn't want him to feel bad, so she stepped forward a little and said in a softer tone, "I didn't mean to make things weird. It was just a joke between friends." He nodded again. His voice was quiet when he finally spoke. "I know." Just 2 words, but his tone felt heavy, like he was carrying something on his shoulders that no one else could see. She didn't push him. She didn't ask anything else. She simply nodded back. He sat down again, slowly, as if unsure of whether he should stay or go. She knew he wasn't sitting down because of her challenge. It wasn't that simple. There was something inside him struggling, something connected to that piano. The event around them continued with its usual noise, but the small corner where the piano sat felt strangely quiet, as if it was separated from everything else. Her friends eventually grew bored and wandered off to look at something else, but she stayed nearby. Not too close, just enough to make sure he didn't feel pressured. She watched him from a comfortable distance, curious but respectful. He kept glancing at the piano, then at his hands, then at the floor. He seemed to be fighting a silent battle with himself. She wondered if he once played and stopped for some reason. Maybe something had happened. Maybe he wasn't ready. She didn't know. All she knew was that the joke she had thrown so casually had touched something deeper in him. She didn't regret talking to him. She just wished she had understood earlier that he wasn't just a quiet guy sitting at a piano. There was more, so much more, that she couldn't see yet. He finally stood up again, but this time with more certainty. Without looking at her or anyone else, he walked away from the piano slowly. She watched him leave, not knowing that this wasn't the end of their story. Not even close. She thought it was just a moment that would fade away by the time she reached home. A small memory. A funny little story to tell her friends later. But she didn't know who he really was. She didn't know what he had hidden inside him. She didn't know that the piano wasn't just an instrument to him. It was a part of his soul. And she didn't know that her playful challenge had opened a door that he had kept closed for a long time. What she saw as a simple joke was something completely different for him. And the quiet moment they shared near that old piano was about to lead them into something neither of them expected. Because she hadn't just spoken to a quiet stranger. She had spoken to someone who once lived through music. And soon, she would discover the truth behind that calm, hesitant smile. The truth about the piano icon she had unknowingly challenged. After the encounter at the community center, the young man returned to his small apartment. The place was modest, with a tiny living room, a small kitchen, and a corner where an old piano rested. It wasn't in perfect shape, but it had been with him for years. The keys were slightly worn, and some notes didn't sound perfect, yet it was the one thing that made him feel at home. Sitting there, he thought about the young woman who had jokingly challenged him to play. Her words echoed in his mind. It was a strange mix of irritation and curiosity. He didn't like being put on the spot, yet there was something in her tone, in the way she smiled, that made him wonder. He had spent most of his life near pianos, ever since he could remember. He grew up in a modest household where money was always tight. His parents worked long hours, and there wasn't much time for anything beyond basic needs. But they had a small upright piano at home, and from the moment he could reach the keys, it became his sanctuary. He would spend hours pressing each key, discovering which notes made him feel happy, which notes made him feel sad, and which notes could tell stories that words never could. As a child, he had been naturally gifted. Teachers and family friends often noticed his talent. Some suggested that he should study music formally, but his parents were skeptical. They believed he should focus on more practical skills that would secure a stable future. They didn't see the piano as a serious path. It was just a hobby, something to pass the time, not a way to earn a living. But he never stopped. Even when they discouraged him, he would stay in his room, sometimes hiding from his parents, practicing and learning by himself. He learned to play pieces that were way beyond his age, reading sheet music and experimenting with different styles. The piano became more than an instrument. It became his voice, his way to express everything he couldn't say out loud. By the time he was a teenager, he was performing at small local events under a stage name. He didn't want anyone to know he was playing seriously. It felt safer to be anonymous. People who attended these performances were often surprised by the depth and emotion in his music. Some called him a prodigy, others called him a genius. He didn't care about the labels. What mattered was the feeling he could create, the way a melody could touch someone's heart. But life wasn't always kind. There were obstacles that forced him to step away from the spotlight. Family obligations, financial pressures, and self-doubt all played a part. Eventually, he withdrew, deciding it was safer to stay in the background, letting his talent remain a quiet secret. Now, years later, he was living a life that seemed ordinary to others. He worked a simple job during the day, came home to his apartment, and spent his evenings with the piano. He played because he had to, because it was a part of him, not because he sought recognition. But seeing her that day had stirred something unexpected. He realized that he hadn't felt curiosity or surprise in a long time. Her playful challenge had reminded him of the thrill he once felt when people listened to his music, even if they didn't know who he was. He remembered the first time he had performed in front of an audience. He was just a kid, nervous and trembling. But the moment his fingers touched the keys, something magical happened. The audience became quiet, and for a few minutes, the world outside the music seemed to vanish. That feeling had stayed with him, a secret treasure he carried even when life pushed him toward other priorities. Playing the piano had been his escape, his way of surviving difficult times, and now, thinking about her words, he wondered if maybe it was time to reconnect with that part of himself. As he sat there, he let his fingers hover over the piano keys, feeling the cool surface under his fingertips. He remembered pieces he had played as a child, songs that once brought tears to the eyes of strangers. He remembered the feeling of performing without being noticed, the silent approval of those who listened and felt something without ever meeting him. And suddenly, he realized that he had missed sharing that feeling with someone else, even if just once. It had been years since he had performed for someone who didn't know him, someone who saw him only for his music and not for the fame or reputation he had once had. The memory of her challenge lingered. She had spoken those words so casually, yet they had reached a part of him that had been silent for a long time. He couldn't stop thinking about the way she had smiled, the light in her eyes, the way she had expected nothing serious but had given him the space to decide. It was refreshing. It reminded him that music could be simple, joyful, and still meaningful. That night, he played again. He didn't aim to impress anyone. He didn't care if anyone heard. He played for himself, letting the melodies flow freely, exploring emotions he hadn't touched in years. His fingers moved with a familiarity that only comes from years of dedication and love for something. The music filled the apartment, echoing off the walls, creating a world where nothing else existed. He remembered why he had fallen in love with the piano in the first place. It wasn't for applause or praise. It was because it allowed him to speak, to feel, and to connect with something larger than himself. As he played, he realized that the encounter at the community center had awakened something in him. He had been living quietly, hiding behind his modest life, but now he felt a spark of possibility. It wasn't about the young woman anymore. It was about himself, his gift, and the joy that music could bring, not only to him but to those who might listen. He remembered all the times he had been too afraid to share his talent openly, the countless opportunities he had missed, and the regret that had quietly followed him over the years. That spark made him wonder. Maybe it wasn't too late to embrace his music fully, to stop hiding, and to let the world see what he could do. He thought about what it meant to be a musician. It wasn't just about skill. It was about courage, emotion, and authenticity. He had mastered the technical parts long ago, but the emotional connection had always been the most important. Playing the piano was about more than notes on a page. It was about telling a story, sharing a piece of himself with anyone willing to listen. And now, after so many years of silence, he felt ready to tell that story again, even if it was just for one person at first. In the days that followed, he found himself thinking about her more than he expected. Not in a romantic or obsessive way, but in a curious, reflective way. She had unknowingly reminded him of his passion, of the excitement that comes from taking a chance, even when the outcome is uncertain. Her playful words had challenged him, and even though he hadn't responded at the time, he realized that she had planted a seed, a tiny push that could grow into something much larger. He began to practice with renewed focus, not for any audience, not for recognition, but for the joy of it. Every note he played reminded him of the freedom he once felt. Every melody carried memories of past performances, of the quiet nights spent alone at the piano, and of the emotions that had shaped him. He was reconnecting with himself, and it felt both strange and exhilarating. One evening, he decided to revisit some of the pieces he had played during his teenage years at local events. The familiar notes flowed from his fingers, bringing back memories of those nights filled with nervous anticipation and quiet satisfaction. He could almost see the faces of the people who had listened, the subtle smiles, the teary eyes, and the gentle applause. Those memories, once distant, were now vivid and alive again, reminding him that music had always been his truest companion. He also reflected on why he had withdrawn from performing publicly. Fear, doubt, and the pressures of life had all played a part. But now, he realized that hiding his talent had also prevented him from fully living. Music wasn't just a hobby. It was a vital part of who he was. He had underestimated the joy that sharing it, even in small ways, could bring to himself and others. And so, he made a quiet decision. He wouldn't rush into anything, but but he would no longer let fear control him. He would play not for fame, not for money, but because it was his voice, his expression, and his gift to the world. And somewhere in the back of his mind, he knew that the young woman's playful challenge was more than a joke. It was a reminder that life often presents opportunities in the most unexpected ways. He felt a sense of anticipation he hadn't felt in years. It was like standing at the edge of a familiar but exciting new world, knowing that the first step could lead to unexpected and wonderful things. The piano, once a quiet witness to his private moments, now seemed to call to him, urging him to play, to express, and to reconnect with the music that had always defined him. And though he didn't yet know how that connection would unfold, he felt ready. Ready to embrace his music, ready to let the melodies flow, and ready to face whatever came next. The memory of her challenge lingered, not as pressure, but as a gentle nudge, reminding him that sometimes life's smallest moments can lead to the greatest awakenings. For the first time in years, he felt a sense of possibility, a sense that his music and perhaps even his life was about to take a new, unexpected path. A few days after the community center encounter, the young man found himself walking past the same old piano again, though this time it was different. He wasn't going to perform publicly, at least not in front of a crowd of strangers. He just wanted to see the piano, to touch the keys and remind himself why he had loved playing in the first place. It was a quiet afternoon, and the hall was almost empty, just a few people lingering in corners. The piano sat in its usual place, quietly waiting, almost as if it knew he would come. He approached slowly, his fingers lightly brushing over the worn wood. Sitting down on the bench, he closed his eyes for a moment, remembering the playful challenge that had sparked something inside him. He didn't need an audience or applause. He just needed to feel the music once again, to reconnect with the rhythm and emotion that had defined his life for so long. He placed his hands on the keys, feeling the familiar grooves under his fingertips. The piano responded almost like an old friend greeting him, ready to speak through him. He began to play, softly at first, testing the notes and letting the melody flow naturally. Each note seemed to awaken memories, feelings, and moments he had buried over the years. As the music grew, the hall seemed to change. The noise from the outside faded, and all that remained was the piano and the story it told. It was as if the room itself had become a sanctuary, a private world where only the music and he existed. Meanwhile, she was passing by the hall again, drawn by a casual curiosity. She didn't expect much, just wandering through the building to see what was happening. But then she heard it, a sound that stopped her in her tracks. A melody that was gentle, yet full of emotion, filled the empty spaces of the hall. She recognized it instantly, even though she had never heard it before. It was the kind of music that grabs your attention without asking permission, that touches something deep inside you. She followed the sound quietly, peeking into the hall. There he was, sitting at the piano, completely absorbed in his playing. His eyes were closed, his face calm, almost serene, but there was a depth to the emotion in his hands that she hadn't expected. Every note carried a story, a feeling, a memory that seemed too powerful to belong to one person alone. She stayed hidden at first, not wanting to interrupt. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. The melody was beautiful, flowing with skill and emotion that spoke to something deep inside her. It wasn't just music. It was a language of feelings, telling stories without words. She felt a strange mix of awe and curiosity. Who was this man really? And how could someone so quiet create something so profound? He continued playing, unaware of her presence. He wasn't trying to impress anyone, yet his fingers moved with precision, grace, and emotion. The music rose and fell, soft and strong, like waves of feeling moving across a vast ocean. She felt tears prickling her eyes, not because she was sad, but because something in her heart recognized the passion behind each note. This was not ordinary talent. It was the work of someone who had lived and breathed music for years, someone who understood how to speak to the soul through an instrument. She finally stepped closer, careful not to make a sound. She watched his fingers glide over the keys, his hands moving almost instinctively, yet with control and artistry that was breathtaking. She felt a shiver run down her spine. It was more than just skill. It was emotion, experience, and depth combined in a way that few people could achieve. She wondered why he had never shared this side of himself before, why the world hadn't known about the talent he possessed. There was a quiet mystery about him, a life hidden behind the ordinary exterior she had seen days ago. He continued playing for several minutes, each melody telling a different story. Some notes were joyful, some melancholic, some filled with longing. She noticed that the expressions on his face changed with the music, each emotion flowing naturally from him, as if he had no choice but to release it. She felt privileged to witness it, understanding that this moment was private, not a performance for anyone else. She had stumbled upon a side of him that very few people would ever see. The music reached a gentle conclusion, the final notes lingering in the air like a soft whisper. He opened his eyes slowly and exhaled, almost as if he had been holding his breath. She realized then that he had poured a part of himself into the piano, more than she could have imagined. It wasn't about showing off or proving anything. It was about expressing something that had been inside him for years, something that words could never fully capture. He looked up and noticed her standing nearby. She froze for a moment, unsure of what to say. She hadn't expected him to see her, and she didn't want to disturb the delicate moment they had just shared. But he smiled softly, a small, calm smile that felt familiar in a strange way. It wasn't the playful smile from before. This one carried a quiet acknowledgement, a recognition of her presence and perhaps even her understanding. She took a hesitant step forward, feeling the words coming slowly. "That was amazing," she said softly. I didn't expect." Her voice trailed off. She didn't know how to describe what she had just heard. The music had touched her in a way that left her almost speechless. He nodded, not proud or boastful, just accepting her words. "Thank you," he replied quietly. "It's been a long time since I played like that." She smiled, sensing that this was a special moment. "It's beautiful. You don't know how much it moves people. Even me, I can feel every note." He looked down at the piano keys for a moment, then back at her. "I don't usually play for people. I forgot how it feels to share it." They stood there in silence for a few moments, the echoes of the music still lingering in the air. She realized that this encounter was different from the playful challenge at the community center. This was genuine, raw, and real. She could sense that he had hidden this part of himself for a long time, and now, slowly, it was emerging again. Curiosity got the better of her. "Why didn't you ever play for people before?" she asked gently. He hesitated. "Life. It just got in the way. Responsibilities, expectations, fear. And maybe I didn't trust that anyone would understand." She nodded, understanding without judgment. "I think people would understand if they really listened. You just have to give them a chance." He looked thoughtful, fingers brushing over the keys as if testing them. "Maybe. It's been a long time since I felt ready." She stepped closer, feeling the warmth of the moment. "I don't know about anyone else, but I'd listen anytime." He gave a small smile, a mixture of gratitude and relief. It was as if her words lifted a small weight he had been carrying for years. He realized that sharing his music didn't have to be intimidating. Could be simple, personal, and meaningful even if it was just one person listening. They started talking slowly at first about music, about life, and about the moments that had brought them to this point. He told her about playing in secret as a child, about performing under a stage name, and about the decisions that led him to step back from the public eye. She listened intently, fascinated by the story behind the music. She didn't interrupt or judge. She just let him speak, understanding that this was something deeply personal. She shared her thoughts too, though not as much about herself. She wanted him to feel comfortable, to know that his story mattered and that someone was willing to listen. The conversation was easy, natural, and comforting, like a gentle exchange between two people who didn't need pretense or expectation. It was simple, human, and real. As they talked, the quiet afternoon passed, and the sun began to dip lower in the sky, casting a warm glow through the windows of the hall. The piano remained, silent for the moment, resting after the emotional performance. but both of them knew it wasn't over. There was a connection now, a shared understanding that went beyond words, rooted in the power of music and the sincerity of their interaction. She finally stood up, realizing it was time to leave. "I should go," she said softly, though neither of them moved immediately. It felt strange to end the moment so abruptly. He nodded. "Thank you for listening." She smiled, feeling a warmth she couldn't explain. "Anytime, really." As she walked away, she felt a sense of wonder. She had come expecting nothing, just a casual visit to the community center. And now she had witnessed something extraordinary. She realized that people often carry hidden talents, stories, and emotions that the world never sees. Sometimes, it takes a gentle nudge, a playful challenge, or even a quiet moment to uncover them. Meanwhile, he sat at the piano for a few more moments, letting the quiet settle around him. He realized that playing music wasn't just about personal expression anymore. It could be about connection, about sharing a part of himself with someone who genuinely understood. The experience reminded him why he loved the piano so much and why he had never completely let go of it, even during years of silence. That day marked a turning point. The encounter had awakened something he hadn't felt in years, a desire to reconnect with his music and to share it, even if only with a few people at first. And it wasn't just about the piano. It was about trust, connection, and the unexpected ways life introduces people who inspire us to rediscover ourselves. As he finally stood and packed his things, he glanced back at the piano one last time. It had been a quiet witness to a moment of awakening, a moment that would shape the days to come. He walked out with a sense of purpose, feeling that perhaps the world was ready to hear his music again, starting with her and maybe more people later. And somewhere deep inside, he knew this was just the beginning. After that afternoon at the hall, life continued, but nothing felt quite the same for either of them. She kept thinking about the music she had heard and the quiet man behind it. It wasn't just the notes or the skill. It was the feeling he had poured into every melody. She couldn't stop wondering about him, about his story, and about the depth hidden behind his calm demeanor. Meanwhile, he returned to his apartment, still feeling the warmth of that shared moment. Something inside him had shifted. He had realized that music wasn't just for private enjoyment anymore. There was a way to connect, to reach someone else through what he created. And for the first time in a long while, he wanted to embrace that connection. Days went by, and she found herself at the community center again, almost by coincidence. She wandered around, looking for small events or interesting things to watch. And then, she heard it again. A melody, soft and flowing, carrying emotion with every note. Her heart skipped a beat. She followed the sound, her curiosity pulling her closer until she saw him sitting at the piano, completely absorbed. His fingers moved with grace and confidence, and the music seemed to fill the entire space with a quiet, almost magical energy. This time, she didn't just stand and listen. She walked closer, and he noticed her immediately. There was a small, warm smile on his face, and he gestured slightly with his hand, inviting her to stay. She felt honored to be allowed into this private moment, feeling that she was witnessing something truly rare. He continued to play, each note flowing naturally, but there was a difference this time. He was not only playing for himself, he was aware of her presence. Yet he didn't try to impress or perform. It was simple, honest, and real. She could see the passion in his eyes, the careful movement of his fingers, and the emotions that poured through every note. The music was telling stories, stories of longing, hope, memories, and unspoken words. After finishing, he didn't immediately stop. He let the last notes linger in the air, feeling the quiet around him. She stayed silent, not wanting to break the spell. Finally, he turned toward her and spoke. "I didn't expect you to come again." She smiled softly. "I didn't expect to hear this, but I'm glad I did." He nodded, a thoughtful expression crossing his face. "It's been a long time since I shared like this. Most people don't notice or they don't care to listen. But you seem different." She felt her cheeks warm. "I care. I listen. And I want to understand, if you let me." He studied her for a moment, then slowly began to tell her his story. He spoke of his childhood, growing up with the piano as his only companion. He described the long hours of practice, the secret performances, and the quiet joy he had found in music even when life felt difficult. He spoke of stepping away from the public eye, of fears and doubts, and the way he had almost forgotten the thrill of sharing his talent. She listened intently, absorbing every word. She didn't interrupt or offer advice. She simply let him speak, understanding that these were memories and feelings he had held close for years. And in doing so, she realized that she was witnessing more than just the story of a musician. She was seeing the story of a person who had faced obstacles, made sacrifices, and held on to his passion against all odds. When he finished, there was a quiet moment between them. She wanted to say something meaningful, but words felt insufficient. Finally, she said, "I think people should know about you, about your music, your story. It's incredible." He looked down, a mixture of humility and hesitation in his eyes. "I don't know if the world is ready, or if I'm ready. Sharing this side of me, it's not easy." She nodded. "I understand, but sometimes the right person hearing it can make all the difference. And maybe it starts small, just like today with me." He smiled, a small but genuine smile, and for the first time in years, he felt a sense of possibility. It wasn't about fame or recognition. It was about sharing a part of himself that mattered, even if it was only with one person at first. The thought that someone could truly listen and understand was powerful, more powerful than he had realized. As they continued to talk, they discovered common interests beyond music. They shared thoughts on life, creativity, and the small joys that made each day meaningful. Their conversation was easy, natural, and unforced. It didn't feel like a meeting between strangers. It felt like a connection, subtle and authentic, slowly forming through shared moments and understanding. She began to see the man behind the music, the quiet strength, the sensitivity, and the dedication that had shaped his life. He was more than his talent. He was a person who had endured challenges, pursued his passion, and remained humble despite his extraordinary gift. She realized that she had stumbled upon someone truly remarkable, someone whose presence and story were worth knowing. He, in turn, saw in her a genuine appreciation and curiosity that was rare. She didn't judge or dismiss him. She didn't expect anything beyond honesty and openness. That simple, human understanding was enough to encourage him, to remind him that music and expression were not meant to be hidden away forever. He felt a quiet hope stirring within him, a feeling that he had almost forgotten in his years of silence. Days turned into weeks, and their meetings became more frequent. She would visit the hall casually, never imposing, but always curious. He would play, sometimes for himself, sometimes with her quietly listening. Each encounter strengthened a bond built on mutual respect, understanding, and shared moments of music and conversation. Neither of them rushed anything. There was no pressure, no expectation. It was simply human connection growing naturally. One afternoon, as he played, a small group of people passing by stopped to listen. They didn't know him, didn't expect anything, but the music drew them in. She watched as they became captivated, their expressions reflecting wonder and emotion. She realized then that his music had the power to reach beyond a single person, to touch others in ways words could not. He noticed their presence but didn't falter. He played with sincerity, each note carrying the emotion he had lived with for years. And when the small crowd gathered, applauding quietly afterward, he felt something shift. It wasn't about recognition or fame. It was about connection, the subtle realization that sharing his music could bring joy, understanding, and emotion to others. She smiled, feeling proud yet humbled by what she had witnessed. She understood then that this was just the beginning. The man she had met as a quiet stranger had revealed a depth she hadn't anticipated. His music, his story, and his presence were gifts that the world might one day see, starting from small moments like this, growing into something greater over time. As the hall emptied and they remained, she said softly, "I'm glad I heard you today. I'm glad you played." He looked at her, his eyes reflecting gratitude and something else she couldn't quite name. "Thank you for listening," he replied. "It means more than I can say." They left the hall together, walking slowly, not needing words. The connection between them was quiet but undeniable. It wasn't romantic or dramatic. It was human, real, and profound. It was the start of something neither of them had expected, built on understanding, respect, and the shared experience of music and life. That day marked another turning point. The truth of his talent, once hidden, had been gently revealed. She had seen it, felt it, and appreciated it. And he had discovered that sharing didn't have to be frightening or risky. Could be natural, gradual, and deeply rewarding. Life continued, but now it held a new sense of promise. He played more often, sometimes with her nearby, sometimes for the quiet hall, and sometimes simply for himself. Each time, he felt the weight of years lift slightly, replaced by the joy of expression and the realization that someone understood. She, in turn, found inspiration, not just from the music, but from the quiet courage it took for him to share it. And though they didn't know what the future held, both of them felt that the music, the story, and the human connection they had discovered together were only the beginning of a journey neither of them had expected, but both of them were ready to explore. After weeks of meeting at the hall and sharing quiet moments filled with music and conversation, something shifted between them. It wasn't dramatic or sudden. It was gentle, almost imperceptible, but it was there. The connection they had built over shared stories and melodies became more than friendship, more than admiration. It became trust, a deep understanding that they hadn't expected but welcomed fully. She began to see his world through his music. Every time she listened, she noticed little details. The pauses that carried emotion, the subtle changes in tempo, the way certain notes lingered, almost as if they were speaking directly to her. She realized that music wasn't just sound to him. It was a language, a reflection of his life, his memories, and his emotions. She felt privileged to witness it, to be part of a world that he had kept mostly to himself for years. He, in turn, appreciated her presence more than he could express. She didn't ask for explanations or performances. She didn't demand anything beyond sincerity and understanding. And that simple acceptance gave him courage. It allowed him to play with freedom, to let his emotions guide his hands without hesitation or fear. He discovered a joy in sharing again, a joy that went beyond personal satisfaction, something that came from knowing someone genuinely listened and cared. One evening, as the sun set, casting a warm golden glow across the hall, she arrived slightly early. He was already there, seated at the piano, fingers poised above the keys, his expression calm but focused. The room was quiet, almost still, and she felt a sense of anticipation, not nervousness, but a quiet excitement. She wondered what he would play today, and more importantly, how it would feel to hear it again. He began slowly, a gentle melody that seemed to float in the air. The notes were soft at first, almost hesitant, but then they grew richer, deeper, carrying the weight of stories untold. She felt herself drawn into the music, experiencing emotions she hadn't expected. It was as if the piano were speaking for him, telling tales of hope, longing, and quiet resilience. She realized that each piece he played reflected not just his skill but his soul. As the music continued, she noticed a change in him too. He seemed lighter, freer, more confident. The hesitations that had once shadowed his hands were gone. He played with a subtle joy, a quiet celebration of the moment, the room, and the presence of someone who truly understood. She smiled, realizing that her curiosity, her simple willingness to listen, had given him something precious. A sense that sharing his gift could be safe, even fulfilling. When he finally paused, letting the last note linger in the air, she clapped softly, not to impress him, but because she felt gratitude, admiration, and awe all at once. "That was beautiful," she whispered. "It's incredible how you make the piano speak like that." He looked at her, a small smile playing on his lips, and nodded. "Thank you. It's easier to play when someone truly listens." The conversation that followed was easy, natural. They talked about music, about the stories behind certain pieces, and about the feelings that had inspired them. He shared moments from his past, the struggles, the joy, the quiet victories, while she shared her own reflections on life, curiosity, and the little things that brought happiness. Each word strengthened their bond, making the connection deeper, more real, more human. Days turned into weeks, and their meetings became a routine they both cherished. He played, she listened, and together they explored the nuances of music and emotion. Sometimes they didn't speak at all, allowing the silence to carry meaning. Other times, they laughed over small things, shared insights, or simply enjoyed the presence of the other. The simplicity of these moments created a foundation built on trust, respect, and genuine human connection. One afternoon, as they sat in the hall after a long session, she looked at him thoughtfully. "You know," she said softly, "I think your music can touch more people. Even beyond us, it could inspire others." He shook his head gently, a mixture of humility and hesitation in his expression. "I don't know if the world is ready. I'm not sure I am either." She smiled, placing a gentle hand on the edge of the piano. "Maybe it's not about the world. Maybe it's about starting small like we have. One person at a time, one melody at a time." He considered her words, realizing the truth in them. It wasn't about fame or recognition. It was about connection, about sharing something meaningful with someone who could appreciate it. And slowly, over time, he felt a quiet courage building inside him, a willingness to embrace his music fully, without fear. As the weeks passed, they continued their shared journey. He played more openly, exploring new compositions and experimenting with different styles. She listened with genuine curiosity, offering support, encouragement, and occasional laughter when the mood lightened. Their bond deepened, rooted not in expectations but in understanding, a rare connection that neither had anticipated. One evening, after a particularly moving performance, he turned to her with a thoughtful expression. "You've changed something for me," he said quietly. "Your presence, your willingness to listen. It's reminded me why I fell in love with music in the first place." She smiled warmly, feeling a sense of satisfaction she couldn't fully explain. "I think you were always meant to share it. I just gave you a little nudge." He chuckled softly. "A little nudge. That turned into something bigger than I expected." They sat together for a while in comfortable silence, letting the moment linger. Outside, the evening sky shifted into deep shades of purple and orange, casting a serene light across the hall. Inside, the piano stood as a witness to their shared journey, to the quiet courage of expressing oneself, and to the human connection that had blossomed through music. As time went on, he became more confident in sharing his music with others, starting with small audiences and gradually expanding. Each performance was different, yet each carried the same sincerity, the same honesty that had defined his private sessions. She remained by his side, not as a manager or critic, but as a friend, listener, and supporter, appreciating every note and every story conveyed through his art. Their relationship deepened naturally, built on mutual respect, understanding, and the shared experience of music and life. There was no rush, no pressure, only the quiet growth of trust and admiration. She admired his humility, his dedication, and the way he expressed himself through his music. He admired her curiosity, patience, and genuine appreciation for his talent. Eventually, he realized that his journey was no longer just about playing music. It was about connecting with people, building relationships, and sharing the gift he had nurtured for so long. And she realized that life often brings unexpected moments, moments that change perspectives, awaken passions, and create bonds that can last a lifetime. One day, after a particularly moving performance in the hall, she turned to him with a soft smile. "I think this is just the beginning. Your music, and our connection, it can go far." He looked at her, eyes reflecting gratitude, understanding, and a quiet sense of hope. "Yes," he said softly. "It feels like a new chapter, one I've been waiting for without even knowing it." They walked out of the hall together, the evening air cool and comforting. The city lights twinkled around them, a gentle reminder that life was full of possibilities. Neither of them spoke for a while, content in the presence of each other, knowing that this was a beginning built on trust, understanding, and shared passion. In the weeks and months that followed, they continued their journey. He played, she listened, and together they explored the depths of music and human connection. The world outside the hall began to notice, slowly and quietly, the music that spoke beyond words, that touched hearts in ways that fame and recognition could never capture. Through it all, they discovered the true meaning of connection, sharing without expectation, understanding without judgment, and supporting each other's passions with sincerity. Their bond, rooted in music and mutual respect, grew stronger with each passing day, reminding them both that life often offers unexpected gifts when we are open to listening, to learning, and to trusting. And so, their story continued, quietly and beautifully, a testament to the power of music, the value of human connection, and the unexpected ways that life can lead us to experiences that change us forever. What began as a playful challenge had transformed into a journey of discovery, growth, and the gentle realization that sometimes the smallest moments carry the greatest meaning, shaping lives in ways we could never anticipate.